Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. I'm Andrew Musgrove, joined by John Gibson. And this week, we're going to bring you Gibbo's ideal transfer window for Newcastle United, the perfect summer transfer window. Will it come true? John's going to reveal his dream shopping list. We're going to talk about a few exits and why it's so important that Newcastle United provide Eddie Howe with that perfect transfer window, especially given that they've not got European football to contend with next season. John, welcome back to the podcast. You keeping well?
Yes, I'm good. Absolutely good.
Fantastic to hear. We'll start with the news that Paul Mitchell has been confirmed as Newcastle United's sporting director, replacing Dan Ashworth, who finally teamed up with Manchester United earlier this week. John, brilliant appointment from my point of view. I think if you were going to try and get someone on Dan Ashworth's level, this is probably the closest thing you can get because he is an elite replacement for an elite person in that position, i.e. Dan Ashworth. And I think it's a brilliant appointment. How do you look at it and what's your conclusion on this appointment?
Relief's the first thing that I think of, Andrew, because we need to have as much guidance as we can for the last 2 months of this transfer window. I think it's a good appointment. It's terrific that it's happened very quickly after releasing Ashworth to go to Man U. We've still got 2 months, all of July and all of August, to get ourselves organised. And the reason I say relief is because in the last week, I have become very apprehensive about what's gone on, and I'm certain that other Geordies have. And so we get a feeling there might be a direction taken by the club with this new appointment, which will get things on track. Because I've got to say, that as we've led up to June the 30th and what has happened has bothered me and concerned me greatly. And if I can explain what I mean by that, it's not just losing two kids who look as if they might have a fabulous future in Elliot Anderson and Minter. It's not just that, it's the reason why we did it to get ourselves into a situation whereby there was obviously blind panic as we were counting down to June the 30th because we thought we might get a 10-point deduction if we didn't manage to ship people out concerns me greatly because we've got full time accountants who have had 3 years to work out the finances situation and to find themselves 48 hours before the deadline in a blind panic to such an extent that they offer someone of the quality of Anthony Gordon to Liverpool because it looks as though nothing else. Anderson or Minter, who had turned down, Everton had fallen apart, he'd turned down Leon. It looked as if they mightn't get him out of the door. All of a sudden, we're in a blind panic where the crown jewels are coming into play. There was even talk that Chelsea had talked to Newcastle about Isak. I think even Newcastle realised that if you let Isak go, you close the doors down, right? Because the ambition is left with him. But Anthony bothers me, and Anthony is still an ongoing thing that won't die. It's been stirred and stirred and stirred on Merseyside because, of course, he's a Mersey lad and he's a Liverpool fan as a kid. And I'll tell you one thing: Newcastle, all the powers of Eddie Howe, when he's great at this, at looking after players and making them feel wanted, etc., etc., they're going to be needed, mine, because his head's been turned and scrambled by it being openly on about the possibility of Liverpool. He's had Trent Alexander in his ear out there having fun. There is work to be done to settle this guy down and make him as positive as he has been in the wonderful season he had here because he's a Mersey lad who has loved Liverpool from the day he was born. He feels about Liverpool the way we feel about Newcastle United. And this has concerned me very, very much. How on earth did we allow ourselves to get in a situation where, with 40 hours to go, 48 hours to go, there was a blind panic and we were offering the crown jewels because we had to get somebody out the door? And make no mistake, I've talked to Jeff Allen this week, the granddad of Elliot Anderson, and he is decimated that Elliot is left Newcastle because it's his club and etc. etc. And he said, without question, Elliot has taken one for the club. He realised that if he'd played awkward and had dragged his heels, etc., etc., the club would have been in absolute disarray. And he took it, and okay, it's worked out to a great extent for him, and I hope it does. But I then look, and I know this is turning into something of a rant, but then look, if I may say so, Andrew, at because we're leading on to what Newcastle do now, apart from having to make Anthony Gordon, when he returns from England duty, feel so wanted it's untrue, and there's work to be done there. What is going to be our situation with the new sporting director at regarding the elite level we can aim for in the transfer market? Because the second thing that bothered me after the way we were panicking is how we have reduced our ambition in one key position, and that one key position is goalkeeper. We accepted way before the end of the season that Pope was the only one that was going to stay. We were going to try to sell Dubrovka. Karius had already indicated that he was going to go, and Gillespie's only fourth choice anyway. So we realised we needed two goalkeepers. We started off by wanting the goalkeeper of Georgia who plays for Atletico Madrid, who I'm not going to attempt to pronounce his name because it's unpronounceable. And I thought that was at 40 million. And I thought that would be part of my perfect transfer window if we got him. Because we were told we wanted a goalkeeper that was going to challenge Pope, not be understudy to Pope. And he would have challenged Pope from the day he come in the door. And so I was very, very excited about that. And he's a wonderful goalkeeper. Then obviously we felt that he was too far out of our reach financially. So we reduced it from 40 million to 17 million and went for James Trafford. I was a little bit worried because he was 21 and he was obviously going to come in. And I've said this on a previous podcast we did. He was obviously going to come in as backup to Pope this coming season and perhaps challenge later on that. So what do we do next? We go from a 40 million pound goalkeeper to a 17 million pound goalkeeper and then sign a 5 million pound goalkeeper who's at Nottingham Forest, the Greek keeper, who couldn't get in the Nottingham Forest side at the end of the season. So he looks make weight. I know he had a good reputation before he went to Forest, but he looks weight. We'll go for him and a 37-year-old Ruddy to stand in as number 3. I'm not too concerned about that. But we have reduced our standard in goalkeeping from 40 to 17 to 5. Are we going to reduce it for an outside right? Or we're still going to go for a centre forward? Or we're going to stick with Wilson?
Well, I think that's why it's been done, John, from what I understand and from what you hear, is that they've potentially not gone out and spent £20 million on Trafford. They've not gone and spent 40 million on Mamos Davili from Valencia because they need to spend that elsewhere. There are other priority positions. Now, this goalkeeper from Nottingham Forest, okay, didn't have the best spell at the City ground, but 150 appearances for Benfica, Champions League quarter-finalist. We have to hope that Newcastle United have seen something about him. They liked him before he went to Forest. We also have to hope that the gamble on Nick Pope's fitness pays off as well, because they are gambling. But if come the end of this transfer window, John, they've managed to spend 50, 60 million on a right winger, and I know you've got some names. I don't know who's on your list. I'm looking forward to seeing who it is. But let's say, for instance, Brian Mbeumo from Brentford, if he's come in for 50 odd million pounds, I think Newcastle fans would be quite happy with that balancing act with that sacrifice, if you want to say, regarding the goalkeeper, if it's meant that that money can be spent elsewhere on a position which is seen as more as a priority.
Yeah, if that turns out to be the case, and that's what the next 2 months is going to prove to us, um, then that I think will be acceptable. But we were told by the hierarchy in the way that things are leaked that we were going to sign a goalkeeper that was going to challenge Pope for this season. And we weren't told that we might have to offer Gordon to get through June the 30th. I mean, I've got a right to be worried, and anybody that's a passionate Newcastle United fan will be worried, particularly the way things have happened on June the 29th and the 30th. And therefore, when you see this with the goalkeeper, you say, please now let's see this is going to be reversed in the next 2 months. And that's why I'm delighted to see a sporting director come in that can get a grip of this and lead the drive to get it right. Because if Eddie Howe is not to be hung out to dry, he's got to get a top quality outside right and a top quality right sided centre half and get his centre forward position solved to his satisfaction, whether that's Wilson out and another one in, or whether it's Wilson stays. But and then if it is Wilson stays, there's always the worry in the Geordie's mind about are we going to get caught with the two centre forwards injured simultaneously. Yes, it is rescuable, but for the first time, we are beginning to get a little bit concerned because 2 months ago they weren't worried about spending money on a goalkeeper. All of a sudden they are now. What's the change? Have they suddenly found there was a hole in the accounts that they didn't realize about? That in that there wasn't going to be that much money around, and they had to jettison these two guys. And honestly, they had to get these two out so quick it was untrue in the end. Their feet didn't touch. And, that's fine if we come out on the plus side. We all accepted what we were told 12 months ago when we lost Maxi, and that was understandable that you've got to sacrifice somebody to make a step backwards to make two forward. That's great. If we get a high profile, big money outside right, get a quality right sided centre half, and maybe a centre forward, then we'll be more than happy. But that's got to
Mm.
happen. The way things stand, the sacrifice on the goalkeeper um, is only worthwhile if it's reflected in other positions. And we're waiting to see that. And I hope that is the case. And if that is the case, that's fine. But it doesn't take away from the fact, Andrew, that it was a right blind panic around June the 30th, wasn't it?
It was, and I think it caught a lot of people off guard. I don't think anyone had Elliot Anderson down to leave. I think Minter was always set to go. They did well to get £33 million for him. I think they did well to get £35 million for Anderson as well. I mean, and I say that in terms of Nottingham Forest not undercutting them, because I think Forest would have been well aware that Newcastle United were a wee bit desperate and pushing it quite close to the deadline. I think Anderson is worth 35 million and will be worth much more in the years to come. I'm gutted he's gone, but as you said, John, he's taken one for the team. And your point there about we need to see, the players in other positions come in, and then we'll forget about the goalkeeping situation. I think now that Paul Mitchell's been put in place, I think you'll soon start to see those arrivals come. I think before the squad meets up, we will have at least two arrivals in the bag. I think you will have that one on the right wing. I think Anthony Elanga at Nottingham Forest is one to watch out for, as well as Mbeumo. And I think you'll also probably see a centre back come in, because Eddie Howe wants them in early. He wants everyone together before the jet off to Japan, before they head to Germany in the next couple of weeks as well. He wants to be able to work with them across the entirety of that pre-season. You've mentioned there, John, a few positions. You've mentioned the right wing, you've mentioned the centre back, and you've mentioned potentially centre forward. My three top positions there as well. Where do you want to start? I think it'll be interesting to start with your number one priority, which I'm assuming you're going to tell us all is that right wing.
Oh, yes, without a shadow of doubt. I think that's very, very important. I've been touting that for an awful long while. We need an upgrade on Miggy Almiron. Thank you for all you've done for us, Miggy, and you have been a good servant initially in dire times, and you've done us proud from that point. You've never sold us short on willingness and attitude and to do well for yourself and for the club. But we definitely need an upgrade on Miggy if we're going to shoot to be a top four side, a top five side this season, and perhaps win some silverware. That is the number one position for me. But it's not alone. I would want a centre half as well, but it's the number one position we need to improve upon. And I mean, for me, Ulysses the guy I wanted, so I'm not going to have my perfect transfer window because I wanted the big Georgian in goal and I wanted Ulysses outside right as perfect. But I realised that's ambitious financially, even if we hadn't had the trouble we had on June the 30th. And we've got to pull our oar in from that, knowing that we weren't going to get Ulysses and always believing that he would end up just out of our price range, etc. I would love to get Elanga from Nottingham Forest. Um, and if he does come here, I think he'll send a postcard to Dan Burn thanking Dan for his help in the transfer. By the way that where the Elanga played against us when Forest were up here. Um, he would, and he's got a very, very good pedigree with Man United. He's quick, and we are quick on the counter, and we're quick up front. And I think he would blossom even more at a club like Newcastle, a front foot team that's going places than he has at Nottingham Forest, where he's looked the part. But the one other that I would like, and you know because we've mentioned it before, is the Brentford boy. I think, and I know you do, I think he is a very, very good player. So if it become him, then so be it. I'll put, for me, Elanga one and the Brentford lad two.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I've long touted Elanga as a possible replacement for Miguel Almiron, and as you mentioned, people know I'm a massive fan of Brian Mbeumo from Brentford. I think, considering what happened at the end of June and reports at the time of recording today from Luke Edwards in the Telegraph that Newcastle may only have £100 million to spend, and then they'll have to generate more funds from player sales, which is very doable because you can see Trippier going, you can see Miggy going. But if Newcastle United are going to have to be a little bit careful when it comes to the budget, then Elanga would probably be the better bet ahead of Mbeumo, simply because Brian Mbeumo was likely to cost you 50, 60 million pounds, you would think, whereas Elanga signed for Forest last summer for 15 million pounds. Forest, while their PSR accounts are looking a little bit more favourable than they did last season, they still need to be a little bit careful with the money they spend and bring in. So Newcastle United, I think, could offer 35, 40 million pounds perhaps, get Elanga through, who carries just as much as a threat as Mbeumo. He's a bit more versatile than Mbeumo. He's younger as well. Swedish international, so he knows Alexander Isak, so they'll hopefully have that chemistry about them. I think if you're looking for a cheaper signing than Mbeumo, Elanga for me would be my number one choice. If Newcastle had a bit more money to spend, I would probably go Mbeumo ahead of Elanga. I think his stats are better. He's been in a side that has needed him because Ivan Toney obviously got suspended, and it was all resting on Mbeumo to get the goals, and he did that. He's tremendous. He's quick. He's strong. He's a really, really good player. I think, John, it just all comes down to the finance. And if Newcastle United need to be a little bit careful, they need to watch the pennies, go and get Elanga for maybe £20 million less, and then you can put that £20 million towards a right-sided centre-back or maybe a third striker.
I mean, the interesting thing as well on starting this new transfer window, I haven't got to June the 30th, which was the cut-off point for the 3-year thing. If they're starting into a new 3-year situation, we know at the end of the coming season, the £105 million ceiling, if you like, is going to go.
Yeah.
because they're going to get a new system in, which is much more fluid and much easier to get round, if you want to use that unfortunate expression. So they've got to bear that in mind, that they're not going to be operating financially under quite the stringent accountancy situation that they've been doing for the last 3 years. Yes, they are for one more season, but after that, in season two and season three, it's going to be a lot easier. I guess when we all I'm saying about the outside right is that it would be my number one priority position. How much they can spend on getting that guy in is so fluid because it depends on what else you can get, who else you can get out, like Almiron and maybe Trippier, etc., which will bring you money in that you can use. They've got the Champions League money coming. The other thing that has got to be decided by Eddie, talking to the hierarchy and his new sporting director, is right. How much, if anything at all, are we going to spend on the centre forward? Are we going to stick or twist? Are we going to go for a centre forward, which you'll not get under 35 million? And that would be for somebody like Calvert Lewin, who they hoped to get for that price because of his injury record. And then when they couldn't, when Everton were asking for more, they pulled out. So it's obvious they're not going to. I mean, if you're going for a pucker centre forward who's number one, going to be your number one centre forward, you're going 60, 70, 80, 90 million. And that is out of the question. And we don't need a number one centre forward because he's that. And so if they're going for a number two, you go for somebody 21-year-old that you might get for 30 million, or you go for somebody like Calvert Lewin who's got a, a record of injuries which keeps his price down, is etc. So are they going to spend anything there? Do they feel they can't get Wilson out of the door now? It the sort of price they want to Saudi, in which case do you just stick with Wilson? They've got a decision to make about the centre forward, which will impact on how much money they've got to spend for a right winger and the centre half.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because I think you and I, John, if we were making the decisions, we'd be a little bit more to the point about positions, a right winger, a centre forward, a defensive midfielder. But what we've learned from about Eddie Howe over the last couple of years is that he likes to be a bit more fluid. He likes that versatility. You know, you see it with Anthony Gordon, primarily a winger, but if need be, can be put up top. And it's interesting you mentioned the centre forward scenario and what will he do? You know, if he hangs on to Wilson and he's got Alexander Isak, he might look at someone like Brian Mbeumo and think, okay, primarily a right winger, but at his time at Brentford, he's played 29 times as a second striker and 27 times as an out-and-out striker. So he can do that job. He scored 11 goals in those, 51, 52 appearances. So not a great record, but he's proven he can score goals in that position. He's got more goals in that position than Anthony Gordon has. So I do wonder when they're sitting down and they're looking at targets. We know they've looked at both Elanga and Mbeumo, but if they're looking at it and thinking, I want that versatility, then you look at it and you think, well, actually, Mbeumo is that versatile player. He'll do a fantastic job on the right wing, but if called upon to go up front, we know he can do it up there as well.
Yeah, you can get two birds with one stone. They've certainly, it was Eddie that said they would have to be cute in the transfer market this summer at the end of last season. And that obviously involved June the 30th and beyond on the limitations of who we can buy. And if you can buy people that can play in two positions, um, and I mean, even though we would never dream of it, Isaac can play in two positions. He can play on the left. Mind, everybody can play on the left, can't you? When you think of that left side where Gordon is, you've got Harvey Barnes, you've got Joe Linton that can play out there, and you've got Isaac that can play out there. But there's a lot of players who play in two positions. Um, I mean, theoretically, Joe Linton can play at centre forward. But I think he's twice the player where he is and then playing there. But yes, that can come into play. It I mean, some of the whispers were that, first of all, it looked as if Callum was going, and it looked as if he was ready to go. He was putting out these little statements about little teasers about friends saying goodbye, etc. And then the next thing, it looks as if perhaps he won't be going. Perhaps a deal can't be done. That's to be solved. But outside right is the big problem. I can see why you're saying about the Brentford guy, but only they know how much they're sorting out the centre forward situation. Only they know how easy or difficult it is to move on Callum Wilson. Only they know what is the situation with Trips. Does he, under his personal situation and his private life, and taking into consideration as well his age and etc., and that he did consider a move a few months back to Bayern Munich, would he be quite prepared to move on? And would they say, well, right, we need the cash? I mean, Newcastle proved on June the 30th that outside of Isaac, anybody is a possibility to be jettisoned. Anybody. So that includes Trips, etc., etc. Do you cash in on Trips if you don't cash in on Callum Wilson? And Miggy, we know openly, is out there in the market. Um, so it's very fluid. But what we want, and that's the hope of a new sporting director coming in, what we want is front foot. We've now got June the 30th out of the way. We've escaped, we presume, we've escaped. And by the way, it must have been serious if we thought we were going to get a 10-point deduction. How on earth did we get in a situation where that was a risk? I mean, I'm staggered. I'm staggered because there was no hint of anything at that. And we have been geniuses, allegedly, in the transfer market from day one, even though the last two windows haven't been the greatest in terms of people coming in. But it's been a shock, and we don't know where those tremors are. They're gone, and why is this Liverpool Gordon thing hanging around? Because that would change the landscape enormously if he suddenly disappeared.
It would. And I think that's something else that runs into this perfect transfer window, is that Newcastle United, in an ideal world, will get Alexander Isak tied down to a new contract. There's talk about Anthony Gordon now being offered a new deal after the last week. If Newcastle United can get those two tied down to a new deal and locked in, that would be a major win for this transfer window as well. It protects the value of the player in Newcastle United's favour. It shows the player that they're valued, and it's a carrot to the other players. If you work hard and you're successful here, you'll get a nice wage packet and a couple of extra years on your original deal. So hopefully they can get something sorted with that. Wilson-wise, John, it's interesting because we know there's interest in Saudi Arabia. West Ham have been linked as well. I just can't see him moving to a Premier League club. I'm not sure what club takes a gamble on Callum Wilson given his record, because the very reason Newcastle are potentially going to cash in is because they can't rely on him to play enough games to carry the load with Alexander Isak. Now, others say, well, you sell Callum Wilson for 15, 20 million pounds because of that injury concern. How much is it going to cost you to replace him? And you mentioned Calvin Lewin there. I mean, they were talking 35, 40 million pounds for someone who's arguably got just as bad as an injury record as Callum Wilson. And that shows you maybe where the market is at. Can you understand, John, if Newcastle United decide to take a gamble on Wilson and say, look, it's going to cost us too much to replace someone of his pedigree, even though he doesn't get enough games, but the games he does play, he scores goals. So we'll take a gamble, we'll keep him, and we'll not have to spend 50, 60, 70, 80 million pounds on an out-and-out striker who might not even be first choice anyway.
Well, they wouldn't spend that much on an out-and-out striker because he wouldn't be first choice. And Eddie always wants to play just one up front. He doesn't want two. He might play somebody in a 10 occasionally, but he doesn't want twin strikers like in the old days. You would have MacDonald and Tudor, and you could have Shearer and Ferdinand. He wouldn't do that. So he wouldn't spend 60. He would spend about 30. In an ideal world, if Wilson went, you would spend about 30 to get somebody of Calvert-Lewin, and that's why that deal was off. Only because he would have come. Only because they were sticking out for 40 and we thought we were getting our arm twisted and it was a bit too much. But you've got to get somebody with a little bit of baggage. It reduces the price to around the 30 million mark, or a 21-year-old you pluck from France who nobody's ever heard of and who were willing to have a go, which we tried to do a couple of windows back. Um, but I mean, yes, I think that Newcastle might well, because Wilson is well loved by Eddie. And I think it, by the way, you used the word and you're absolutely right. It will be a gamble if we stick with Wilson, because we worried about that all last season, didn't we? All last season, we're worried about, there was no safety blanket at all for Isaac, because Wilson was regularly uh, under the weather, whether he was whatever it was. He just seemed, if the wind blew the wrong way, he wasn't available to us. It's a matter of how much they're going to spend and who they can move out. Um, and they've got to move Almiron out. They've got to move Wilson out if they've got a replacement. And I think they wouldn't move Wilson out without a replacement, because by Jove, that would be flying by the seat of your pants. But they can move Trips out. Then will they consider other people? You get the feeling that if somebody come in with a big offer for almost anybody, not anybody, whether that was Longstaff, whether it was uh, Gordon, because we've got three outside lefts, or there's the possibility of selling. Because also, what we've got to bear in mind when we talk about the perfect transfer window and the way Newcastle might shape up starting 11 next season, Newcastle have spent very big money in the transfer market recently, say as much as £100 million, that we're still waiting to see justified for various reasons. Tonali at £52 million has got to be justified, because he very quickly out of circulation because of his suspension. So he is a plus. If we've lost Anderson in midfield, we've gained Tonali. But at £52 million, he is still to justify that outlay. I would suggest Lewis Hall at £28 million. That's big cash, We forget, if we were in so much trouble on June the 30th, how on earth before June the 30th did we commit ourselves to £28 million for Lewis? I mean, have we been irresponsible at all? I mean, I only put the question up. I am not saying that's true. But you've got to look at the facts. And the facts were, we got our calculations wrong. On
I
June the
think
30th come up, we got them wrong.
I think with that Lewis Hall deal, and this is what they tried to do in January with a few other deals, was trying to get a loan deal with then an obligation to
Yep,
buy, so they didn't necessarily have to splash that cash on the
correct.
wrong side of the account. So doing that, if those numbers, as we
But
believe they
is the
may
number
do,
is the number too high? That's the question.
yeah, potentially. But then, I mean, the market is is crazy. Some would argue, I don't agree, but some would argue that 35 million for Anderson is too much. But it is the way of the market.
And it's not 35 million down.
Yeah,
If he's a huge success, it becomes 35. If he's
yeah,
a huge success of false, it becomes 35 million. But
mm,
Newcastle haven't got 35 million today.
yeah.
And it's if he becomes a success. Well, if he becomes a success, he's worth it. If all becomes, by the way, I want Hall and Tonali. And by the way, the third one, when I said there's £100 million to be justified this season, and I have great hope that it will be. The other one's Harvey Bonds, who hardly played because of his injuries. Now, I am a great believer that Tonali, Hall, and Harvey Bonds might well become successful this season. I'm not suggesting they were bad buys for 1 second. I'm just saying their outlay has got to be justified this season. My hope is that it will be in all three cases. But they come into this new look Newcastle side for the new season. They come into it because we didn't see Hall till the very death of last season. Tonali's been missing for obvious reasons, and Barnes with his injuries. So they can bring an extra dimension to Newcastle United in this coming season. And certainly the faith we had in them to pay the sort of money we did needs repaying this season, and hopefully will be.
Yeah, fingers crossed. I can see Lewis Hall definitely paying that faith back. Harvey Barnes is an interesting one because he's going to be more rotated than I think first team. But the glimpses we saw of him, John, last season, I've got more than enough confidence to believe he's going to be worth every single penny Newcastle United paid for him. Tonali's going to be the interesting one. Obviously, he's been keeping fit, been training with his teammates. But as we always say, there's a big difference between being fit and match fit. But fingers crossed he can hit the ground running when he does return at the end of August. Just going back to up front, if Newcastle United were to keep Callum Wilson, which I think there's a strong possibility they might do, I wouldn't be against Newcastle going after someone like Liam Delap, who's at Manchester City, spent last year on loan at Hull, only scored 8 goals, but I think he's 20 years of age. There's a £20 million price tag on his head. Southampton have been linked. Huge potential there. He's tipped to really become a star. We've seen with Man City that sometimes there just isn't space for these youngsters and they have to go elsewhere. Cole Palmer being a prime example. Southampton have got history at picking other players from Man City up and taking them down the south coast. Lavia, one of them who ended up going to Chelsea for ridiculous amounts after a good spell at Southampton. I would be in favour of Liam Delap becoming that third striker. He's young. He can learn from Isak. He can learn from Wilson. He can also play out on the right wing. £20 million, I think, would be a very sensible punt for Delap. People you speak to say he's got he's got massive ability. He's raw, but they are definitely signs that he could be a top striker. That for me would be the youngster I would go for if they're going to keep Wilson alongside Isak.
You've got, as we said earlier, and that fits in completely, Andrew, they're not going to sign the 60, 70, 80 million pound centre forward because he would have to play every week and he won't with Isak here. You will either sign an experienced centre forward who has an injury history, which brings his price down, like Calvert-Lewin, or you sign a young boy 20 odd year old. That's what we've been talking about, and this kid would fit in with that. And Manchester City and Chelsea and Southampton have made a great thing and done it very, very well of producing academy players and selling them on because it's 100% profit, a la Elliot Anderson, and they have too many people within their club. For every Foden that comes along and makes it at Man City, there's a Palmer that's got to go to make it elsewhere. But they're very clever with that. They get money in from, and Chelsea have done it and booked everything that's going with them about this ridiculous buying in, but to sell a load of academy players. Hall's one. £28 million, 100% profit, and they're clever at that. Man City are clever at that. Southampton are, and yes, that kid would settle into the type of backup we need in that position at the sort of fee that I think is level and is required. We do need. I mean, we talk about the perfect transfer window. If it was perfect, we would definitely have an outside right. We would definitely have a centre forward, and we would definitely have a right-sided centre half to go with Kelly, who we've already got.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I use the word perfect when I think both of us are actually looking at it with a little bit of a realistic tint on it. Because in a perfect window, John, you are signing Elise. You're not signing Liam Delap. You're going to go and sign a top-class striker. But I think I'm in favour, and I hope you guys watching and listening are in favour of the perfect window within certain constraints of being realistic. So for me, as I say, looking at it from a realistic point of view, keep Wilson, bring in Liam Delap for 20 million and let him learn off, two of the best goal scorers the club have had in recent seasons. Your other position, John, is a right-sided centre-back. Currently, we have Fabian Schär there. Jamal Lascelles will be back towards the end of the year after he returns from his ACL. Now, they thought they were going to get Tosin in. He's obviously gone to join Chelsea. How important is this right-sided centre-back this summer to bring someone in and rival Fabian Schär?
Very much so. I mean, I'm a great fan of Fabian Schär, and I admire what he's done in Newcastle United because he's transformed himself. He was always a good player. He was always good on the ball. He was always able to ping 60-yard passes that would drop at a person's feet. But he had mistakes in him. He is developed, and I've talked to you about this before, Andrew. It's not coaching, it's confidence. The confidence that Eddie Howe's given him, and the belief that Eddie Howe's shown in him. He knows the manager rates him. He knows the manager wants him to play. He is terrific. He's been terrific, and he's been terrific in the Euros. And England might well find out how terrific he is on Saturday tea time in the next round when Shaw plays against England. He is a quality player. But you can say Pope's a quality goalkeeper, but you need a second one because suddenly Pope's out for 6 months. You say you've got Botman, he's suddenly out for X amount of time. You've got Joe Linton, he's suddenly 4 months, he disappears. We never saw Willock last season virtually. So injuries can happen, and we haven't got any cover or anyone pushing Shaw. And he's on the wrong side of 30, and the way he plays, he could play on for another 3 years at the top level. But you need a second man there. We haven't got that. We've got left side if you want to go with Kelly, if you want to go with Byrne, you've got Botman when he eventually comes back. Though Botman and Lascelles, we've almost got to forget about. You're coming up to Christmas before you're looking at them. And they've also got to get up to speed to play in the Premier League effectively again. So I think we need a right, and it's been accepted by Eddie Howe in the club that that's so. We need a right-sided one. The killer was not getting Tosin on a free transfer because that, not spending a penny there, not spending a penny on Kelly, two good signings would have set us up to get a good priced outside right and centre forward, wouldn't it?
No, 100%. I mean, when you talk about bringing in that right-sided centre back, are you talking about someone who comes in ahead of Fabian Schär? I mean, we spoke about this a couple of weeks ago, didn't we? In the Let's Talk About episode of Fabian Schär. I'm just wondering if your position's changed because let's say they went after the AC Milan defender, Tomori, who we know there's
Oh,
been a bit of contact with. He would come in, probably costing you 30, 40 million pounds, and you would say you'd have to start ahead of Fabian Schär. But as you said a couple of weeks ago, John, Schär was one of the players of the season last season. So, and
yes, he was.
he's performed very well in the Euros. Are you looking for someone to take him out of the team, or are you looking for someone to push him? Or are you looking for someone to learn from him?
I'm looking for somebody to challenge him from day one for his position. If you're a top four side, if you talk about Arsenal or you talk about Liverpool or you talk about Manchester City, they don't have somebody that's the understudy to the guy that's currently in the side. They have people in the say to both of them. By the way, it's up to you two who gets the shirt. I'll be the judge of it, but it's up to you two. I'm not buying somebody to learn from Shaw. If we are as ambitious as we're supposed to be, if we're as ambitious as we want to be, we sign somebody that's as good as Shaw, and then we say to both of them, "You're on that money. You'll get bags of chances, but who gets the shirt is up to the person that does the deed." And as much as I'm a Shaw fan, I think we've got to have somebody to challenge Shaw. When you have no, that is one of the concerns I've got about Pope. The road we've gone down, I'm not expecting a Greek boy to challenge Pope for the shirt. I'm expecting him to play when Pope's not available or in the domestic cups. And if we buy a centre forward, the centre forward's not going to be challenging Isaac because we're not going to pay that sort of money. He's going to be understudy. I'm not wanting an outside right that's an understudy. I'm wanting an outside right that automatically goes on the side. Now, the right side at centre half is going to have a challenge because Shaw is quality. But how long will Shaw be a quality? And you've got to have a good one. I mean, you come along, you think Botman, quality player. So we've got no problems on the left side of midfield. Not until Botman's out for 7 months, and that's the way it's been. Then there is a problem. You've got to have. You're as strong as your weakest link. And your weakest link is when you've got some position, whether it's centre forward after Isaac or it's a right-sided centre half, where you're down to the bare bones if that guy gets an injury. That's your weakest link. And if we want to be top four, and I know we're going quickly towards that, but we've done it once. If we want to be regular, then you don't buy understudies. You buy somebody to challenge who's in the team. There's nobody untouchable in the team, with the possible exception right now of Isaac, because he got 25 goals. But he's got to do that again the minute we get going at the start of this season, or it's a different ball game. There's nobody that isn't under any challenge. If you're a top side. Everybody thought Ramsdale was a wonderful goalkeeper at Arsenal, but all of a sudden Arteta gets Reina on loan, puts him in ahead of Ramsdale, who's supposed to be an England goalkeeper, and now this guy's Ramsdale is very much a number two. That's the way big clubs operate.
Yeah, 100%. I think bringing in someone like Tomori would do that. It would be a statement.
He's my number one choice, by the way, for that position. If we could buy whoever, I would go for Tomori.
He's absolutely brilliant. Obviously, they've got Lloyd Kelly in who can play the left-sided centre back. He'll be battling with Dan Burn, you would imagine, for that starting place come the game against Southampton. Obviously, then Botman returns towards the end of the year. But one person who has really impressed me, he is a left-sided centre back, so he's obviously not in discussion for the right-sided centre. But Jacob Greaves, who it looks like he's going to go to Ipswich. He's currently at Hull. He looks a real talent, but obviously Newcastle have got Lloyd Kelly in that position. In terms of players to go out, John, Kieran Trippier, if a bid comes in, I'll just shout off a number. Say £12 million is put on the table for Kieran Trippier. Are you cashing in?
If he is happy to go, yes. I'm happy for him to stay and fight Livramento for it. But if we need to get people out the door, and we didn't realise how much we needed to get Anderson and Minter out the door, if we need to get people out the door as much as that to buy for other positions, we've got to get somebody out the door. If it's not going to be Wilson, Almiron is already a done deal mentally. I mean, that he will be sacrificed if we can get somebody that wants him. Who after that? If somebody comes in and suddenly offers money for Sean Longstaff, they may well take it. If they offer it for Trippier, they may well take it. Trips might be at the situation where he actually wants to go, or not want to go, but be prepared to go. At this stage of his career, one last payday, one last challenge, his personal life, yeah, etc., etc. It may be that he's would look to go, in which case it's a very good deal because Livramento's there. It's not a good deal if you haven't got, it's if Shaw wanted to go or somebody put money down for Shaw, it's not a good deal, is it? Because we haven't got a right-sided centre half at the moment. But it would be for Trips if it fitted. And I think we've got to get certain people out of the door. And I actually think, I honestly believe that's fluid. Outside of about a couple of players who would be untouchable, and I'm not certain who is untouchable after Isaac now, after what happened with Gordon, and perhaps. I mean, I heard somebody say that, one of the, and I'm not suggesting this is true for 1 second, but the suggestion was made that one of the reasons we were caught short on June the 30th is because we were convinced that somebody was going to trigger the Bruno 100 million, and we could do nothing about that, because if they do it, then it's got to be considered and it's down to the player. And therefore that money was going to come in even if we didn't want it, and therefore there wasn't going to be a problem. And all of a sudden that didn't on June the 24th, which was the closing date for that. So somebody else had to be sold. So I don't know that anybody's untouchable outside of Isaac. And by the way, our hope Isaac is untouchable, and so does Alan Shearer, because he's been having a little say to make certain that Newcastle don't cash in on Isaac reluctantly. and because he is untouchable. You can't find a 25-goal centre forward for £60 million these days, my friend, and that's what Isak is. So, and by doesn't he look a Rolls Royce, and isn't he the right age? So he's untouchable, but I'm not certain many other people are, and that's
Mm.
what's going to make the transfer window for the next 2 months very interesting.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think from my point of view, I would cash in on Trippier if the deal was good enough. Almiron, time to go, and if someone really wanted Callum Wilson, kind of 15 to 20 million pounds would be enough for me to sell. Sean Longstaff's really interesting one. His contract is up at the end of next summer, and
Yeah.
I think had Elliot Anderson stayed, then I would have been more to Sean Longstaff going. Had Lewis Miley not just picked up an injury which rules him out for 3 months, I would have been more open to Sean Longstaff going. But you've got to consider that Eddie Howe really likes him. You've got to consider that Miley is injured and Anderson's gone. I just don't know if they would cash in. I guess the other side of that coin is that if they manage to get 15 million, 20 million, which would be a lot of money for a player out of contract, who doesn't really set the world alight. He's decent enough, but you're not signing a Scott McTominay, for example. But that would be pure profit. So in the world of PSR, it makes perfect sense to cash in on him if you do get a good enough deal. But I think he probably stays at Newcastle United. I mean, do you think they've got enough, John, given that Anderson's gone and now Miley's picked up an injury? Have they got enough in midfield?
I mean, are we jinxed or what? Are we jinxed? I mean, we've got Lascelles and we've got Botman out till virtually Christmas. And Lewis Miley's doing some extra running in his own time to get fit after injury for the new season and does his metatarsal, and suddenly he's out for 3 months. I mean, we haven't kicked off the season yet, and we've got 3 players on long-term injuries. I tell you what, I would get that lady look into the flipping manager's office, sit her down, and say, "Look, what have I done to upset you? Because we need your help here." We have got 3 players on long-term injuries, and we haven't even started the season yet. And one of them's got injured in the close season, running about on his own. I mean, it is absolutely ridiculous. At this given moment, with Miley not available and Anderson gone, and no other midfielder having come in, there's been talk of Morgan Gibbs White from and yet another Forest player, and nobody's come in, and we're not certain how fit and running and ready Willock's going to be. We can't afford to lose a midfielder as it stands, with Anderson gone and Miley out for 3 months at the moment. One of the months is now in the close season, but it's frightening, and we need to. Are we going to try to get Morgan Gibbs White? I mean, dear me, can we afford? You were talking about the restrictions on cash. If we're buying outside right, a right-sided centre half, and maybe centre forward, can we afford a midfielder? Um, it depends. And wouldn't it be testing the hierarchy, not Eddie Howe, but the board of directors, if an offer come in for somebody like Longstaff, where it was 100% profit? I mean, would they turn it down because of the injuries, or would they say, "Hey, that's a good deal. Let's see what we can get"?
Well, I think we've seen over the last week that they are prepared to do what they don't necessarily want to do. Howe didn't want to
Absolutely,
cash in on an Anderson, but
absolutely.
they had to. So I think a lot of people's perceptions of Eddie Howe and Newcastle United maybe actually changed, and they've
I think
shown that they can be ruthless when they need to be. So I think they probably would cash in if they got a £15
yeah,
million.
because I don't think. I think you're probably right, because I don't think any of these, by the way, is Eddie's decision, because he's not sorting out the finances and he's not the accountant. He would say, "I don't want Anderson to go." In a perfect world, we're using the word perfect a lot,
Yeah.
but in a perfect world, you don't want him to go. In a perfect world, you don't want the guy from Feyenoord to go, do you? And he certainly wouldn't want he loves Longstaff and he loves trips and he wouldn't want anybody to go. But the financial decisions are made above his head. He's sat down there, explained to him. He's an intelligent man. He understands football life. He understands it's got to happen. It doesn't mean he likes it, but he understands it. And that's why it happens. But it isn't his decision. They don't say to Eddie, is it okay if we cash in on Elliot Anderson? They say to Eddie, we're cashing in on Elliot Anderson, and this is why, so that you understand. The same would apply in the next 2 months to anybody that goes, be it Trippier, be it Wilson, be it Longstaff, be it Almiron. Eddie will be sat down and told, we're doing this, and this is why we're doing it, and this is why it might benefit you. Because while you're going to lose Trippier or Longstaff or Almiron, you're going to gain an outside right, a centre half, and a centre forward. So it's that part of life goes on above the manager. The manager
Mm.
sit down, but you've got to keep him on side. But funny enough, it's the manager that's got to pick up the sticky end of the stick, which is what he'll have to do with Gordon in showing him, true love when he comes back. And by the way, Eddie's terrific at that, and we need him to be terrific at that because the guy is scrambled
Mm.
and needs his head readjusting, if you like, simply because it didn't all go away with on the 1st of July, did it? You know, liver the Merseyside press, and therefore you suspect the club are keeping the pot boiling and bubbling.
I don't think Newcastle United will reopen talks unless maybe they're forced to by Gordon pushing the issue. So hopefully he comes back and it's
I
all
was going to
put
say,
behind him.
yeah, it's not a matter now of Newcastle pushing it. I don't think they will. It's a matter of Newcastle's blind panic becoming public knowledge. And believe you me, Anthony Gordon knows about it. And
And
he
yeah,
knows it's not newspaper speculation. He knows about it. And therefore, if it had been another club, you easily get over it, isn't it? But when it's his boyhood club, it's a bit more difficult. It's repairable. It's repairable, but it's got to be repaired sooner rather than later. Don't let him fly straight on his holidays from Germany. Get him back here to pick up his bag and pick up his good lady, and Eddie gets into him for 24, 48 hours before he goes on holiday. Because and you can get players accepting situations, but we've seen players, and we saw how much was Callum Wilson or how much was Trips um, affected after January when things didn't happen. Trips hasn't had a good 2024 with the club, form wise, and perhaps his personal life, but perhaps his transfer speculation. Players are human beings. You've got to get into their mind, and Newcastle have built everything that got them fourth top into a Wembley Cup final and into the Champions League on this camaraderie. We're all for one and one for all. We're all together. We love each other. We're a band of brothers. You don't want that fragmented by somebody thinking, oh, would I have been better away, or oh, that was a missed opportunity. And so that's got to be restored. That sort of balance has got to be restored.
yeah, and I'm sure they'll be straight onto that. I do think Eddie Howe is slightly more say though in terms of who goes. Obviously, they'll say we're thinking about this, but he said before, it's very much a kind of a level playing field. Everyone's kind of involved, and hopefully, Paul Mitchell coming in adds to that. I'm very excited to see that working relationship. A few other players, John. I mean, you mentioned Morgan Gibbs, right? He would be, if we weren't being realistic, he'd be towards the top of the list. I think Mateus Cunha from Wolves could be a really exciting addition as well. But in terms of that realistic perfect transfer window, you've gone for Tomori from AC Milan. You've gone for Elanga from Nottingham Forest out on the right wing. And then kind of up in the air a little bit about the centre forward. It all depends on what they do with Wilson.
Your boy's a good name to
Yeah,
be
Liam
away
Delap
for 20 hours.
um,
Yeah.
would be my choice. But there you go, ladies and gents. Let us. Obviously, we've titled this as the perfect year more to a realistic perfect window. We hope you guys have enjoyed it. I think as I said towards the start, what would really round it off, John, would be to get Isak and Gordon sign up to new long-term deals. That would be brilliant. But it's going to be a very exciting window nonetheless. And I think regardless of how June finished, and even if the budget is around £100 million, maybe not as much as people were expecting, you can guarantee one thing, is that Newcastle United, Paul Mitchell, Eddie Howe, Steve Nixon, the owners, they're going to do their very best for Eddie Howe in this club. They're going to really strive to bring the best in. I know you'll sit there and you'll say, well, John Ruddy, the Nottingham Forest goalkeeper, not quite the level of the very best, but I think there's a logic there. There's a plan there with that. I think now what we'll start to see is they will go out and they will try and bring in players who instantly improve the first team. Do you share that kind of optimism?
Yeah, I'm desperate to share that type of optimism because Newcastle United man through and through for so many years, it's absurd, and we have been on the brink of something, and we're still on the brink of something. I would like something to. The slight bit of negativity which came into view on June the 30th can easily be washed away. Firstly, by the sporting director coming in, that's a real step in the right direction. Now, then, if we can rapidly follow that up by giving Anthony Gordon a big kiss, by giving Isak a new contract, and by buying an outside right for good money, like somebody like Elanga, quickly, like in the next week to 10 days, the mood changes completely again. Yes, we go on and still need a centre half and we'll get him, etc., etc. But I'm just looking for that mood to change a little bit. Let's get rid of the Gordon thing. Let's give him a big kiss and let's see him go on his shoulders with the widest smile on his face that he could have. Let Isak be sitting on a long-term new contract and let us get a big outside right in, and to follow having got the replacement for Dan Ashworth in, and then suddenly we're cooking on gas again. That's I was about to say that's all it takes, but it's a lot. But it is still what you would expect Newcastle to do. What I would love, Andrew, is for them to strike quickly. Not in a month's time. Not in a month's time. That would still be fine, but strike. If you get somebody in the next week to 10 days, it all changes the mood because everybody just talks about the guy that's just come through the door. I'm talking about a big time Charlie. I'm not talking about a cover goalkeeper or number 3 goalkeeper. I'm talking about a big time Charlie, an outside right centre half. Get somebody like that in, particularly forward player, an outside right in the next 10 days. And all of a sudden the sun will be shining even if it is raining.
Yeah, no, sounds good to me. I think we've seen the change in mood already with the appointment of Paul Mitchell, what that has done. And one to finish off on, John, Newcastle United at the time of recording, which is Thursday, the 4th of July. This will be going out on the Friday morning. They've just released a lovely little video confirming that they've changed the Newcastle United sign on the stand back to the old font. They've gone through the archive and picked out some footage from back in the days under Kevin Keegan and who have you, where the sign is the old font, not the font of the previous owner. I mean, it's a nice touch. It's a nice gesture. Fans very happy about it. It's a nod to the future, as well as a look back at the past. Did it bother you too much though? Are you bothered by the fact it's been changed?
I like the little gesture. I don't think there's anything wrong in little touches that make fans smile a tad. That is good news. So I would never knock that. But if it was followed up, we've got him. If it was followed up with a little gesture of a £60 million outside right, that would really bring a smile on my face, and I would be bothered.
Just a little gesture. I'd be really intrigued, and I hope the club do put something together where they tell us are there new letters, are they the old letters, and they've just been stored away somewhere. I might be a bit sad, but I really want to know the journey of these letters, because if they have been stored away somewhere, I think that's a lovely little story. But maybe they'll do that to fill the time over the next month or so. But John, it's been a pleasure to chat to you about this transfer window and what we both like to see happen at Newcastle United. And as you say, hopefully they can strike quickly in the first few weeks of July and hit the ground running. to you guys watching and listening, thank you as always. Hit thumbs up on YouTube, hit subscribe on the channel. If you're listening on the audio channel, thank you as always. Leave us a rating and review. Go on, do it now. We really would appreciate it. And head over to chroniclelive.co.uk for all the latest Newcastle United news, including our daily transfer live blog with all the rumours, gossip and concrete stories from Chronicle Live writers, exclusives like the one Lee Ryder got about Lewis Miley's injury. We do get them. It is worth a bookmark. So come and have a look at what we do. And it's a pleasure as always. We'll see you guys very soon.